Listen to the radio. Harry and Edna's want to show you heard it from the Three Bells.
What-o, Harry?
And after a little of a pause, a what-o, Edna. We're really not on form today. That's Charles Trent. And he's talking about chicken. La poulet zazou, I think that is, which I think means the chicken zazou, I think. Anyway, I've just crashed poor Charles doing his chicken impression. And welcome to Harry and Edna on the Wireless as we take you by the hand and lead you through the current vintage scene. However, we are not talking about fowl or chickens or any type of wildlife, because in a recent show, Edna and I having a natter, and it sort of came up, is it acceptable to wear vintage fashion in the workplace, like sort of every day? And because you occasionally do. Admittedly, it's half the time I see you, you're just in sweatshirt and trousers.
It's not half the time. I spend 5 days a week at work, and we were saying I'm struggling with I do like to dress a bit retro at work, and in the summer it's fine because I've got some beautiful blouses, some beautiful vintage style dresses, but it's the winter that I struggle, because you do, to be fair, default to your warm and cuddlies, don't you? And there isn't much vintage warm and cuddlies out there.
And to be fair, usually because we work in the heritage industry, we're busier in the summer and not in the winter. So in the winter, you do all your jobs that you don't do in the summer because you've got all the visitors, and therefore they tend to be a bit mucky and dirty, and you don't want to get your finest, which is why I see you in sweatshirt. That's what I thought you were going to lead into as to why you wear your sweatshirt and jeans. No. Because you are doing... Well, to be honest, I think I do wear a lot of retro, even because I was thinking of this, because most of my wardrobe, which is now my rubbishy wardrobe, stems from the Manchester days of Manchester of the 90s, and I'm told that's really back in fashion. And here's me painting the house in it, because that's sort of my old clothes, and I'm told they're very in fashion now.
Gosh, don't tell me the 90s has come back round as a fashion era.
Yeah, apparently it is a big deal.
Oh, my goodness.
Mad for it, eh, lad?
No, thank you.
And I was trying to think of some other lines that you would do from that period, apart from you used to wear boiler suits and face masks.
No, that was it. And
you have any acid rave nights, isn't it? That's from the 90s. I'm just thinking
more of the
Oasis,
the Brossettes and
that's 80s.
It was 90s.
Oh, it's 80s.
No, it wasn't 80s. It was early 90s. We're looking at each other now.
You are older than you think.
And the two-tone, what were they? Tracksuit bottoms. No, where you had like one purple leg and one green leg, and wallabies. Don't you? That's the 90s youth I remember.
I thought you would remember the days of Oasis, and we're going well off track here. It's not our beloved 1940s.
It's nothing to do
and
with
the Happy
fashion.
Mondays and those sorts of musical acts.
No. I'm going to Google it now.
Okay, which is even more retro. Sorry, modern. So the answer is it acceptable? Now you say you do try and wear a little bit retro. And then the other question came up, I think it was on one of the various forums on said internet, which doesn't exist, honestly, in our world. And it said, for example, is fully fashioned stockings acceptable to wear? What say you?
I say they were 1986 to 1992.
What? Fully fashioned stockings?
No, Bros. Just to put that one to bed. Fully fashioned stockings at work? No, not no.
That's not right. Now, to help us on this subject, we are joined by our good friend, a while ago, a good friend, Sally Sweetlove, who is probably the UK's #1 vintage fashion guru. If there's nothing, I mean, she knows pretty much anything about clothing from that period. And we're going to pay parts of the conversation we had and her views of wearing vintage fashion, because she wears it pretty at one point pretty much. Since we moved to the island, we haven't unfortunately caught up with Sally. Pretty much at one point about 100% of all the time, you see. And I thought it'd be interesting.
100% of all the time?
Yes, that's a lot of times.
It is.
that is an awful lot of times. So we shall be talking to our Sally. But in the meantime, because it's actually quite fitting, because in between the tracks, you'd like to keep yourself occupied. You're going to be sewing some buttons.
I am sewing some buttons on your vintage waistcoat,
actually. It is. And we're going to play Wearing Pennsylvanians. And guess what they're doing?
Are they buttoning up an overcoat?
What ho?
and they're buttoning up your overcoat, which is incredibly fitting because you are actually doing some sewing on. Well, you said it was vintage. Actually, it's a reproduction. And I thought this leads into, like, do you wear your vintage every day for, like, work or even just around the house, or if you're nipping down to the local supermarket? And I was saying that particular outfit, it looks stunning. It's a beautiful, but I tend to only wear it when I'm on stage because the fabric is not strong, and I just don't think in fact, I never dare sit down in it because I think I'll wear the bottom out.
Yeah, and I think there's, I used to wear vintage originals, but I was always really worried that in those days, you never washed your clothing as frequently as we do now, and certainly probably not at the temperatures we do now. So I then became very worried that I'm washing it too frequently, and I was actually wearing out some of this vintage clothing because it's not really designed, or it doesn't really stand up to. I mean, it's 60 years old anyway, isn't it? Probably 70 now, but it's not really designed for our rigorous washing, and I got really worried about continually, wearing it, sweating in it, and then washing it.
I guess when we say, is it acceptable to wear vintage every day? Now there is a range of reproduction. There's lots of manufacturers out there producing lots of clothing in the vintage style, and some of them authentic patterns, but it's still modern clothing. We're showing our age because when we started, these firms didn't really exist, and we only really could wear original because that's all that was available. And to be fair, it was fairly plentiful. You even found it in we call them in this country charity shops. In America, I think they call them thrift stores. You just came in and found it. Indeed, one of my many talks, my son is into his World War II reenacting, and he bemoans the cost of original uniform. And I said, to be honest, you can blame me and my friends, because back in the 80s when we were playing around, we just used to buy this from the army surplus store, trash it, and then go and buy another set.
Well, it was in such plentiful supply. You didn't really think you'd ever, would you know in how many years' time that you'd be hankering for the originals? In
fact, do you remember, it's gone now, there was a store in, was it Portsmouth? No, Southsea. Sabre Sales or something.
Yeah.
And they used to have literally a mountain that you had to climb. It was like a hill, wasn't it? And you had to climb into it. You had to climb it
and almost dive into it, didn't you, to find your size that you wanted, or, the different styles.
And it was all mixed up together, so you had to tunnel in to find that sort of land army overcoat or something like that.
And they did, didn't they? They would have all that stuff. I mean, it had a certain aroma about it, to be fair.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm not sure what we're going to uncover, like, goodness knows, rats' nests and all sorts, because it was so...
To be fair, I never did find a rat's nest.
No, I know, but I always had that feel.
But, yeah, that shop's long gone since now, and I to be fair, but I do remember that, so that's sort of going... So it came back to that question, when you say, is it acceptable to wear vintage? When we say you wear vintage, you wear retro, what you're actually doing is wearing reproduction clothing.
Yeah.
But you do get comments on it. You're wearing a vintage... Well, a reproduction coat at the moment.
Yeah,
is that from the 50s?
It's 50s coat, and it's very fitted at the top, and you can turn the cuffs back, or you can wear them long, and you can turn the collar up, and it buttons all the way up. And it's got a flare from the waist out, and it's beautiful, sort of forest green. And the amount of comments I've had on it are people say, I love your coat. Where did you get your coat from? Even to the point that Annika Rice, because she came to do some filming where I work, and her and Imogen Stubbs, I allowed them a stroke of my coat.
Did they actually try it on?
It feels really nice. No, they didn't have time, but we got onto the subject of vintage clothing, which was not... It was literally because I was wearing the coat because I was, it was quite chilly when they came to film, and we got talking about vintage clothing, which the director got most grumpy at because they were meant to be filming, not talking about clothing.
You could have let them in. You're at a historical site. This is a historical coat.
This is it. I'm wearing this. And we talked about, vintage clothing, which, was quite interesting.
Well,
and the love of.
Well, while you're thinking of the love of it, we'll play Sidney Limpton and his Grosvenor House Orchestra on a reckless night on board an ocean liner. Now, what fun would that be? You don't get songs like that. Then we're going to come back and chat a little bit more about clothing, because that's what it's about. We want your comments. Don't forget, if you're listening to us on the radio, well, you're in a bit of a mess here, but you could actually tweet us at Harry and Edna. Or you could join us on Facebook at Harry and Edna on the wireless. There is only us. And you could leave us a message And if you're streaming it online on the various platforms that we're on, there's always a comment section, and you could leave a comment on there. What's your views about wearing a vintage style at work? Is it acceptable or not? We're not particularly. We're assuming you're not wearing the originals anymore because, as Edna said, well, to be fair, we did probably destroy. That's why it's in such short supply, because we wore a lot of it out, and
we're sorry.
And we're very, very sorry. We do have some originals, but to be honest, I really don't wear them anymore.
They're very precious things now,
I just look
aren't
at them from behind the plastic bag and stroke it lovingly every now and again, but I don't wear it because you're right. I mean, without being too crude, modern day sweaters, something is a killer. For vintage fabrics. Yeah. It attracts the moths and the grubs and all the sort of yuckiness that you get. Anyway, you don't get that if you're on board a liner, and here we are with Sydney Lipton.
What ho?
And our ocean liner has just docked, and we've all run out, and we've nipped into the shops, because while that was playing, we were saying about how before we used to go to the charity and thrift stores and find all the original clothing and just wear the originals. You're saying, and now there is an industry, I mean, I know, obviously, where you can get vintage, particularly female wear, vintage, but even chap wear is coming quite along.
You really struggled, didn't you, to find any sort of, original clothing particularly, because as you say, men probably more likely used to wear them on the allotments and, you know, wouldn't necessarily have masses of changes of clothes that you would then save. But so we used to find finding originals in our size difficult.
Certainly for me, that is probably a bit more rotund than your average person from the 1930s and 1940s. If you ever look at period photographs, people were not large.
No.
You know, there was...
No. Well, his diet and lifestyle was so different to today, isn't it?
I mean, you do find it, and we did used to find it. I've got a fantastic pair of +4s, and he must have been in weird shape.
I think
I've had them altered, actually brought in, but he was like incredibly thin at the top, whoever this chap was. Do you remember? And they must have been like huge underneath.
They had like a massive panel sewn into the +4s.
I do remember that, but the racecoat was like thinking, what's happened?
He had short arms, didn't he?
Yeah.
You had to put extensions on the arms.
Yeah.
It was the most, I think it was obviously, as you say, adjusted. But so finding original bits was a real struggle. But then companies started up as the scene grew that manufactured from new, which was, massive, wasn't it? And
there are so many of them. I mean, we're trying to avoid names, but there are so many of these firms. Some specialise in shoes, some specialise in lingerie, some specialise the full shebang, don't they? Ball gowns, day wear, casual wear.
But we were saying as well, you used to go hunting in the charity shops, and then.
And that's gone, hasn't it? This stuff just does not appear in charity shops anymore.
No, because even charity shops, which I was first struck with, then went online as specialists. They had specialist shops online, didn't they, where they would sell all the vintage wear.
Oxfam are quite big into that. If you remember, I forgot this, but do you remember? That must have been about 12 years ago. They did a fashion show at one of the places you're working, not where you are at the moment, and that was all full of beautiful. Apparently, if they did have any like classic clothing donated, they were supposed to send it to this central place, and they would then sell it at a premium, because obviously the charity shops are doing this to raise money for their charities, so they obviously want to get biggest bang for their buck, sort of thing.
And so they would specialise, but and then clothing shops sprang up, didn't they? That our daughter shops in. There's one in Cornwall.
Stuff from the 90s. One day she's going to raid my wardrobe and I'm going to lose half my clothing.
Well, there's a shop in Cornwall we go to when we go visiting relatives, and there's a shop in London that does some fantastic clothing. And as you say, it's you do find everything from probably more so 50s, 60s, right up to the 80s and 90s. And she's buying 90s clothing, and you think, golly. I wonder if our parents look at us and think, what on earth are you wearing that for? I hated wearing that when I was, your age.
Well, I did used to like it at the time, but then look at the photographs and think, man, I look silly. Anyway, we'll go back to, after we're going to play the track by Jack Hilton, and very fitting this, 1, 2, button your shoe.
Do you know, I think you've been putting these all in a theme.
I have. You're going to listen to our good friend Sally Sweetlove, who probably hates me saying it, but we always regard her as the ultimate fashion guru. And when you listen to the interview, you'll understand why. And then she popped round and we had a natter, and while she was having a natter, we popped the microphone under her her nose, shall we say. I mean, this is a bit unusual. It's not like a formal interview. It's more of us just sort of chitty-chattering away. But she does talk about when she was young, about how she had to basically try to recreate these clothing. I won't tell you. I'm telling you, I'm spoiling it.
Spoiler alert.
Right, here comes Jack Hilton, and then when Jack goes, you'll hear us talking to our Sally.
What ho?
Come back to our interview with Sally, because we were talking again about what inspired you to start making your own clothes and then doing it as a business. And I think we were saying earlier you were taught by your nana.
I was taught to knit by my nana, but I was taught to sew at school at a very, very young age, in my primary school, in fact. And the first thing I ever made was a red corduroy bib front skirt, and I lived and died in it until it fell apart.
In primary school?
In primary school.
Wow.
Probably the last 2 years, but yeah, and we didn't have a buttonholer, and no zigzag on the machine, so we had to put the hugest Preston on it. And it used to keep popping off.
But we were sort of just talking off air again and saying that's really dying at school, though. They just don't teach the things that I was taught at school, and so to me, sort of making clothing is a bit of a dying art because they're not teaching it
I think
anymore.
it is, and I do have my fingers crossed in some way that the programme that's on at the moment, that I confess with not having seen, the British Sewing Bee, will help in terms of a revival and making things yourself. And I think it's just a satisfaction thing that you can take as long as you like. You can get it to fit you. You can get the right. How many times people say, "Oh, I like it, but if it was only this or that or the other." If you've got that little bit of know-how, you can, not necessarily vintage or retro, even modern, you can make something be exactly what you want it to be. And I think that's really exciting.
Do you think people are put off because they think it's really, really hard to do?
I think they think it's really, really hard, and I think they think they're going to mess up, or they don't understand some of the terminology. But a lot of the time you could probably just follow the pictures on the modern patterns. Some of the vintage ones are a bit even I have to say, are you sure that's right? And then I'll follow their process, and then I might change it. But because people knew how to say that, it's a different kettle of fish. But I think on the modern patterns, the reproductions of the originals, those instructions are so much better. I think most people could go for it. I really do.
Yeah. And do you think expense puts people off? Because it is just so much cheaper to buy new, isn't it, rather than buying all your bits and pieces and material?
It is, but it depends where you buy from in the first place. I mean, if you were going to buy from a, mid-range high street store, then it's probably going to cost you less. But then you've got the danger of walking into a room and somebody's got the same outfit as you. Yeah. And personally, I would die if that ever happened to me. Sounds a bit dramatic, but it's probably true. And that's never happened to me, ever.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't want to look like everybody else. And I think most people do want an edge of individuality, but you can still keep that within the mainstream. But if you've done it yourself as well, you've also got the, I made it.
Yeah.
Smugness.
Yeah. And I guess,
what ho?
And I guess it's like anything, isn't it? It doesn't have to be expensive. You just got to shop around a bit.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of really good fabric shops where you can pick up cottons for not too much money. There's lots of markets and big resurgence in terms, market shopping. There are market stalls, and it doesn't have to be dress fabric. I mean, I've got a gold brocade dress made of curtain fabric.
Yeah.
It weighs an absolute ton, and it took me forever to make it.
Blunted a few needles.
Yeah, but it's exactly what I wanted. In terms of the look, it's absolutely bang on, but I wouldn't probably sell it commercially.
Yeah.
But it was what I wanted. But then that would be authentic for the time, because in the 40s and 50s they would use things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Whatever your material.
Yeah, whatever you could get.
So we sort of want to try and be different, and it's nice to sort of be able to say, I made that, I did that. But for yourself, it was something you've always done from we were talking about from when you were at university, you were making your own clothes.
Well, when I was at university, I had a brief flirtation with the 50s, and then met a chap, as one does, and we got heavily into the 40s scene as was then, which was very small in comparison to what it is now.
Yeah.
And finding anything original, bearing in mind that I'm quite short and quite round, was really difficult. So I'd make everything, right down to my work suits, little dresses. I'd pick up a few bits. Even if I found stuff in charity shops, I'd vintagify them with the original buttons, or I'd try and do something. If the jacket didn't have a belt, I'd put a belt on it. I'd take the turnips off trousers, that sort of thing. Try and make that look right. My reference points were, talked about my nana earlier, I watched huge amounts of old films with her as a child, and I've still got a vast collection, and I would just check my details back to some of those films.
Oh, brilliant. So just so you can be absolutely sure it was bang on authentic.
Yeah, I was authentic as I could get it. I mean, just spot checking that something wasn't absolutely silly. In terms of blouses, extending collars and making sure it always had a revere on it, and as few buttons as you could get away with, because buttons were prized objects in those days.
Yeah.
What ho?
Sally. Sally was talking about haberdashery shops.
Yeah.
Is that not a dying thing?
It is, and I think we are so lucky here on the island. There's a town called Ryde, and it's got some really old-fashioned, lovely shops, as the island does. And it's got one of those haberdashery shops that just sell. It's like an Aladdin's cave, and you go in there, and it seems to stretch on for miles, but it's so rammed with everything. And we were looking for some buttons, because on your retro suit, you'd lost a couple of your buttons, hadn't you? And we thought, what you were going, where am I going to find some more of these? And I went, there's this shop. And I literally took the button, and he has, gosh, it must be thousands of buttons. And we were able to find a really close match. And I was saying to you the other day, I think that it's a dying shop. Not the shop's dying, but you don't, it's a rarity to find it. Because
when you say we live on the island, we live on the Isle of Wight, just in case you don't know, which is an island. If you're from afar, a little tiny island off the south coast of England. And you said that when we moved to, because we're the other side of the island, there used to be a haberdashery shop probably about 300 yards away from us. It was open for about 2 weeks when we moved in here, and then it closed down. And that building is now a block of flats, so that one's gone. And if you go way back when we first lived together in a place called Wolverton in Milton Keynes, there was one about... we lived in a certain street, and then the next street, halfway up, there was a converted house that had been converted to a shop, and that was a haberdashery shop. And while we were there, that one went with a kiss of death to haberdashery shops. We really are. But if you think about it, you've got to sell a lot of buttons to make a living.
You have, and I think that's why he is absolutely chock-a-block with fabric, braiding, buttons. I mean, he's just probably a dressmaker's dream. Cottons, wool, random things like bags thrown in there, classic little corgi cars. He's a bit of everything shop. It's like a whole shopping experience, and you spend hours in there. In fact, one of the joys, if you are into vintage, and again, we would love to hear from you, dear listener, but I find is that you can collect things. You can collect, I don't know, I like model trains, so I could collect certain model steam trains. But the thing is, they're relatively easy. You just go online and click and buy one. But particularly when we used to wear original all the time, particularly when it started getting harder to find, you really felt like you'd track something down. It was like a real art. Yeah. Sometimes you only bought one flying duck, and you need 3 flying ducks to go on the wall. Yeah. And you had to hope you'd find the other 2. Stair clips. Do you remember when we found the carpet clips? That was a real find, wasn't it? And we've never seen them again since.
No.
And I was thinking of my Land Army gaiters. Again, not seen them.
No. So, but I hate to tell you this, folks, if you're going out there, you probably won't find them now. We're talking many, many years ago when you could. But it is still out there. Like you say, haberdashery shops. They exist. I'm sure if you're in Birmingham or the Shetland Islands or Glasgow,
go
somewhere there is one near you.
And go out there, support them, and go and keep these places going. They're absolute, dressmaker's dream.
Because you're not going to find them in shopping malls.
But even if you want a vintage looking like a button, they'll be there.
Hidden away somewhere. Now, we're going to go back and have a chat with Sally very shortly. But first, we'll play a little bit of Ray Noble and his orchestra. And You Ought to Be in Pictures.
What ho?
You're listening to Harry and Edna on the wireless. If you're enjoying the show, well, we love you very much. You can hear the show over and over again. Just go to harryandedna.co.uk, and you can either download the podcast, which is purely speech, or if you want to hear the music and in the joy as the show was meant to be, you can click on the listen again, where this and all the other previous shows are there, including we've got a few a few where Sally joined us on the show, so if you want to find out about Sally. And I did talk about, I don't know if I did, but I talked about fully fashioned stockings at the beginning, and there's one there featuring a lady called Katie Thomas, who does the What Katie Did vintage lingerie range. Don't forget, find us on Facebook. Just go to harryandedna.co.uk. We're going to play a bit of Jan Garber, and then we're going to have a final chat with our Sally.
What ho?
Harry was alluding to earlier how you're a sort of a pioneer in the in the vintage world, because you started off your career and then was wearing vintage inspired clothing.
Yeah, I was very lucky to work in the fashion business, and therefore you could wear what you wanted. But I'd go to work and I would look like one of the girls out of Goodnight Sweetheart, and at the time that was a brand new programme, and that was very new, and people weren't used to seeing people wear sort of 40s things, and it was a bit, oh, what are you wearing? I'd have my hair in victory rolls and in a snood in the office, and people would be, right, it's a different look today. And the next day I'd have a very little fitted 50s suit on, my hair up in a chignon, and do it that way.
So people, because you worked in fashion, people didn't go, hey, that's the fashion of tomorrow. She's kind of inspiring us.
No, unfortunately it still comes very much from designer end down. Yeah. It's what they do that seem to drive the fashion business. I don't think I was ever that inspirational. But that does mean that I've been doing it for quite a while, which is quite scary sometimes.
Can I just quickly jump in on this one? Because I always had this fear that I don't mind being 60 years out of date, but I'm terrified of being so last year. And I'm worried that with the vintage movement getting so popular, will I suddenly become so last season? Although we did have on the show, and if you go to one of the previous shows, you'll see we had Katie Thomas from What Katie Did on the show. And she was saying when she started, they said, what happens when the vintage bubble's over? And that was like 15 years ago, and hey, they're still doing very well. So what do you have that fear that it go out, or do you think, because I can imagine when you were doing that in the early 90s?
Early 90s.
It would have been, people would have done a double take, because it was sort of, wow, so glamorous, so different, a real trend setter, not following the fashion at the time. You were way above there, you were Vivienne Westwood or whatever. You know.
I think underlying there's always been that little wave, little nod back to the 40s. If you look at some of the 70s fashions, particularly on the tea dress side of it, admittedly the 70s was the era of the cleavage. Those 40s tea dresses have been amended to have that look about them, but they've still got the nipped-in waist, the four-gore skirt, the puffed sleeves. They're just dropped much lower down, more like an American 40s dress rather than a British 40s dress. But I think in terms of vintage, I think because it's accessible because of the internet, that I think that underlying trend is going to be a bigger underlying trend. But I think there'll be people who dip in and dip out, and they'll move on, and then they'll get different jobs where they can't wear what they want, or they'll just get that little bit older, or they'll meet somebody who isn't into the scene. And I think that will just be organic. I think it'll keep going. I really do. I think a lot of people have made a lot of money out of it, and there's a lot of people who haven't. But as long as people enjoy it, then I don't mind.
We've certainly found at the nightclubs that we do, there's a lot of younger generation coming to the nightclubs and dressing up. So it's not just stuck with one or two generations doing it. It's actually coming up through the generations.
That was almost what it was like in the 90s. I'd go to a dance, or we'd go to somewhere for a tea thing or something, or there used to be a place in Greenwich Market, and there'd be ladies there who probably were around at that time, and they'd be sitting there with the boxes over their shoulders. And then there'd be their children sort of still a bit older than us, then we'd be in our early 20s, and we're probably that person that we would see now at your nightclub, probably seen slightly as upstarts and getting into the scene, but still enjoying it. And I think that's really important. I think it's important that we know what our heritage is, and why we dress the way that we did, and that to me I think is really fascinating. Why we wore particular things, and why the style changed so much in 47, away from utility and CC41, into the new look, and into that complete antithesis of what had gone before. I think it's really important.
What ho?